Imagine a cargo train pulling out of a city in southwest China. It's long, hundreds of meters, packed with containers filled with electronics, machinery, fresh produce, and raw materials. Everything from factory parts to everyday goods is stacked inside, ready to move. But this train isn't heading to a port. It doesn't stop at a coastline. Instead, it moves south, cutting through mountains, crossing rivers, passing small towns and major cities. It leaves China, enters Laos, and keeps going. No ships, no oceans, just steel tracks stretching across countries. And eventually, it reaches the heart of Southeast Asia. This is not just another railway. This is something much bigger. Because for decades, global trade in this region followed a simple rule. If you wanted to move goods, you used the sea. Massive cargo ships carried everything through narrow maritime routes, especially one critical passage, the Strait of Malacca. At one point, nearly 40% of global trade and a huge share of Asia's energy supplies passed through that single stretch of water. It was the backbone of the entire system. But now, something is changing. A new route is emerging, not on water, but on land. A railway network that can move goods across borders without ever touching the sea. Faster in some cases, more flexible, and for some countries, more secure. And that raises a powerful question. If trade no longer needs the sea, what happens to the countries that built their power on it? What's happening today might feel new, but the idea behind it is actually decades old. Back in the 1960s, long before high-speed rail and global supply chains, there was already a bold vision taking shape. The goal was simple in concept, but massive in scale. Build a railway that connects all of Asia and eventually links it to Europe. This idea became known as the Trans-Asian Railway. Imagine what that meant at the time. A continuous rail network stretching thousands of kilometers, crossing deserts, mountains, and dozens of countries. It would allow goods to move across continents without relying on ships at all. In theory, it could completely change global trade, but in reality, the world wasn't ready. At the time, much of Asia was still developing. Many countries had just gained independence and were focused on basic nation building. Industrial capacity was low, infrastructure was limited, and funding was scarce. Then there was politics. The Cold War divided countries into opposing camps, making cooperation extremely difficult. Building a railway across borders required trust, coordination, and long-term stability, things that were in short supply. And on top of that, the technology just wasn't advanced enough. Building railways across difficult terrain was expensive, slow, and often risky. So the idea didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because it came too early. For decades, the vision of a Trans-Asian Railway was put aside, more like a dream than a real plan. But then, something changed. Fast forward to 2010. Representatives from 18 countries came together and signed an agreement to revive the project. This time, it wasn't just an idea on paper. It was a coordinated plan with clear routes and real commitments. And the world was different now. Economies were stronger. Technology had improved. Countries were more connected through trade, and infrastructure had become a priority. What once seemed impossible now started to look achievable. The timing had finally caught up with the vision. When the Trans-Asian Railway was brought back to life, it wasn't just a single line on a map. It was a network, carefully designed to connect different parts of Asia through 3 major routes. Each route had a different purpose, and each came with its own challenges. The eastern route runs along the eastern side of the continent, linking China with Southeast Asia through multiple countries. On paper, it looks promising, but in reality, it involves too many borders, too many systems, and too many political differences. Progress has been slow and complicated. The western route takes a completely different path, moving through Central Asia toward Europe. But here, the problem isn't just politics, it's geography. Harsh terrain, deserts, and long distances make construction difficult and expensive. Add in security concerns, and progress becomes even slower. But then there's the central route. This is the one everyone is watching, because compared to the other two, it is simpler, shorter, and more practical. The central corridor starts in Kunming, China, then moves south through Laos, continues into Thailand, extends into Malaysia, and potentially reaches Singapore. In total, it stretches about 4,500 kilometers, forming a continuous land bridge through the heart of Southeast Asia. And this is where things get interesting. Because this isn't just about trains. This is about creating a new economic artery, a route where goods, resources, and money can flow more efficiently between countries. Instead of relying only on sea routes, trade can now move directly across land. But the reality is not as smooth as the map suggests. Some parts of this corridor are already complete, some are still under construction, and others are slowed down by politics, funding, or national interests. It's like building a chain, and only some of the links are finished. And until every link is connected, the system can't fully work, which leads to a critical point. The future of Southeast Asian trade may depend on whether this central line is ever fully completed. For years, the Trans-Asian Railway was just a plan. Lines on a map, agreements on paper, big promises with uncertain timelines. But everything started to change in 2021. That's when the China-Laos Railway officially opened. For the first time, a key section of this massive vision was no longer theoretical. It was real, operational, and moving goods every single day. This railway connects Kunming in China to Vientiane, the capital of Laos. At first glance, that might not sound like a big deal, but when you look closer, it's a turning point, because Laos is a landlocked country. For decades, that meant limited access to global trade. Moving goods in and out required long, expensive routes through neighboring countries, often by road. It was slow, inefficient, and costly. But this railway changed that. Now Laos is directly connected to China's vast manufacturing network, and through China to global markets. It's like taking a country that was once stuck in the middle of the map and suddenly plugging it into a global highway. And the impact was immediate. Since opening, the railway has transported more than 70 million tons of cargo. In just the first 10 months of 2025, the value of goods traded along this line reached around $3.1 billion. That's not a small experiment. That's a functioning trade corridor. Travel times have been reduced. Costs have dropped. And businesses now have a faster, more reliable way to move goods across borders. But more importantly, this railway proves something critical. The concept works. For the first time, a land-based trade route through Southeast Asia wasn't just an idea. It was actually moving real cargo, generating real money, and changing real economies. And once one section works, it creates momentum. Because the next question becomes obvious. If this part is already successful, what happens when the entire network is connected? At this point, it might seem like everything is moving forward. The plan is clear. The first section is working. Momentum is building. But there's a problem. Not every country is moving at the same speed, and right now Thailand has become the biggest bottleneck in the entire system. Geographically, Thailand sits right in the middle of the central route. If you look at the map, it's the bridge between Laos in the north and Malaysia in the south. Without Thailand, the railway cannot form a continuous corridor. It's like building a highway where one section in the middle is still missing. No matter how advanced the rest is, traffic can't flow smoothly. So why is progress slow? The answer comes down to control and strategy. Thailand has made a deliberate choice. It wants to finance most of the railway itself and maintain a high level of independence over the project. On the surface, this makes sense. Infrastructure like this is not just about economics. It's also about national control, long-term debt, and political influence. By funding the project domestically and only accepting limited foreign involvement, Thailand keeps more control over its own infrastructure, but that choice comes with trade-offs. Without large-scale external financing, projects move slower. Budget approvals take longer. Construction gets divided into smaller segments, each with its own bidding process and delays. Instead of one coordinated push, the project becomes fragmented, and that slows everything down. Right now, the first phase of the Thailand Railway is only about 40% complete. The next phase was only officially approved in 2025, and the full connection is not expected until around 2030. That's a long time in a fast-moving region. And this creates uncertainty, because the entire corridor depends on this missing link. If Thailand moves slowly, the whole network moves slowly. So now the big question is not just whether the railway can be built, it's whether all the countries involved can stay aligned long enough to actually finish it. And while Thailand takes a cautious approach, another country is moving in the opposite direction. Faster, more aggressively, and with a clear goal in mind. While Thailand is moving carefully, Malaysia is moving fast. Because Malaysia sees something bigger than just a railway. It sees an opportunity to redefine its role in global trade. For decades, Southeast Asia's trade system has been dominated by sea routes. Goods flow through major ports, especially through the Strait of Malacca. Countries that control key ports benefit the most. But Malaysia is now building a different model. Instead of relying only on the sea, it is investing heavily in land-based logistics, combining railways, inland ports, and seaports into one integrated system. The goal is simple: turn Malaysia into a major gateway between land and sea. One of the most important pieces of this plan is the Perlis Inland Port. This is not a traditional port by the ocean. It's built inland, connected directly to railways. Think of it like a dry port, a place where containers are sorted, inspected, stored, and then moved efficiently by rail or truck. With an investment of around $1 billion, this facility is designed to handle customs clearance, cold chain storage for food and agriculture, container transfers between rail and road, and processing and distribution. In other words, it acts like a mini logistics hub, but located on land instead of the coast. This is important because goods coming from Thailand or China don't need to go all the way to a crowded seaport first. They can be processed inland and then moved quickly to the nearest port when needed. But an inland port is only useful if it's connected to strong transport lines. So Malaysia is also upgrading its rail network. One key line runs from Padang Besar at the Thai border to Penang Port. This creates a direct link between cross-border rail traffic and one of Malaysia's major seaports. This means goods from Thailand can reach the sea faster, without long detours or delays. But the most ambitious project is the East Coast Rail Link, often called the ECRL. This is a 665-kilometer railway that cuts across Malaysia, connecting the west coast, where the Strait of Malacca is, to the east coast, facing the South China Sea. Why does this matter? Because ships traveling between Asia and the Middle East or Europe usually have to pass through the Strait of Malacca, which can be crowded and slow. The ECRL offers an alternative. Cargo can be unloaded on one side of Malaysia, transported across land by rail, and then loaded onto another ship on the other side. It's like creating a shortcut across the country, avoiding a long and busy maritime route. With an investment of about $12 billion, this is not a small project. It's a strategic move. And once it's connected to the broader rail network, it links directly into the larger Trans-Asian corridor. Put all of this together, and you start to see the bigger picture. Malaysia is not just joining the railway, it is positioning itself as a new center of trade, a place where goods can move between land and sea quickly, efficiently, and with more flexibility. And that changes the balance. Because if goods can move through Malaysia instead of traditional routes, then some of the busiest ports in the region may start to feel the impact. And no country is watching this shift more closely than Singapore. To understand why this shift matters, you need to understand one thing. Singapore's power comes from its position. If you look at a map, Singapore sits right at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula, at the entrance of the Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Almost every ship moving between East Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and Africa passes through this narrow stretch of water. And Singapore is right there, like a gatekeeper. But Singapore doesn't just rely on ships passing by. It has built an entire system around them. Its ports are among the most advanced in the world. Cargo arrives, gets unloaded, sorted, and then sent out again on different ships. This process is called transshipment, and Singapore is one of the best at it. In 2024, Singapore handled over 41 million containers, ranking it among the top ports globally. A huge portion of that cargo doesn't even stay in Singapore. It just passes through, moving from one route to another. That's the business model. And for decades, it has worked extremely well. Because if you control a key point in the sea, you control the flow of trade. But now, that system is being challenged. Because railways don't follow sea routes. They don't need to pass through narrow straits or crowded ports. They can go straight across land. And that creates a new possibility. Goods can bypass Singapore entirely. Instead of going through the Strait of Malacca and stopping at Singapore, cargo could be unloaded in Malaysia, moved by rail, and sent directly to its destination. According to some estimates, 15 to 20% of transshipment cargo could shift away from Singapore if these land routes become fully operational. That may not sound like a majority, but in a system this large, even a small shift can have a big impact. Less cargo means less port activity. Less port activity means lower revenue from handling, storage, and services. And it doesn't stop there. Entire industries depend on this flow. Logistics companies, shipping services, maintenance, even jobs linked to port operations. So the impact could spread across the economy. This is where the real conflict begins. It's not just about infrastructure. It's about two different models of trade: sea-based networks built over centuries and land-based corridors emerging in real time. And for the first time in decades, Singapore faces a situation where its geographic advantage might not be enough on its own. Because if trade can move around it instead of through it, then its dominance is no longer guaranteed. What we're seeing here is bigger than just one railway or even one region. This is about how global trade itself is evolving. For centuries, the rules were simple. If you controlled the sea, you controlled trade. That's why key maritime routes, like the Strait of Malacca, became so important. They were choke points, narrow passages where huge volumes of goods had to pass through. Control those points and you gain influence over the entire system. But choke points also come with risks. They can become congested, slowing down shipments. They can be disrupted, whether by accidents, conflict, or political tension. And they create dependency. If something goes wrong, the entire supply chain feels it. That's why countries are now looking for alternatives. And this is where land routes come in. Railways like the Trans-Asian Corridor offer a different model. Multiple pathways instead of a single route, faster delivery for certain types of goods, less exposure to maritime bottlenecks. It's not about replacing sea trade completely. Ships are still the most efficient way to move massive volumes over long distances. But it's about balance. Instead of relying on one system, countries are building parallel networks. And from a strategic perspective, that matters a lot. Take China, for example. A large portion of its energy imports, especially oil, still passes through the Strait of Malacca. That creates a vulnerability. If that route is disrupted, the impact would be immediate. By developing overland connections, China can reduce that risk, even if only partially. It's like having a backup route, not always the fastest, but critical when needed. And as more of these land corridors develop, the importance of traditional choke points could slowly decline. Not disappear, but become less dominant. Which brings us back to Singapore, because the question is no longer just about competition. It's about adaptation. Will Singapore double down on its strengths as a global maritime hub? Will it integrate with these new land networks? Or will it find entirely new ways to stay at the center of global trade? Because history shows something important. Trade routes don't stay the same forever. They evolve with technology, politics, and economic needs. And right now, we may be watching one of those shifts happen in real time. For centuries, control of the sea meant control of trade. But as steel rails stretch across continents, the balance of power may be shifting, from the oceans to the land.